Okay, so imagine this, just for a second. You've reached the very, very top of your game, the absolute summit of your career.
The mountaintop.
The mountaintop, exactly. You've just been awarded the Nobel Prize. It's not just a professional thing, right? The whole world is suddenly looking at you. They're applauding. Cameras are flashing everywhere. Your phone is just ringing off the hook.
Total global validation.
Right. And then, in the middle of all that noise, your own government, the leadership of your own country, steps forward.
It's the homecoming hero moment, the thing everyone dreams of.
Yes. And the government says, we are so, so proud. We want to give you the Order of Culture. And we should be clear, this is not just some plaque you hang on the wall.
No, this is the highest honor for an artist in Japan. It's a huge deal.
And it's bestowed personally by the emperor.
For almost anyone else, this is the storybook ending. It's the dream scenario. You take the medal, you bow, you cement your legacy as, a national treasure.
Right. And then imagine looking at that offer, looking at the government, and in a way, looking the emperor right in the eye and just saying no.
And it's not a polite no either, is it? It's not an, oh, I'm busy that day kind of no.
Not at all. We're talking about a refusal that, it must have struck in the very heart of the Japanese identity at the time.
It was a political statement of the highest order.
His quote was, I do not recognize any authority, any value higher than democracy. That was the line he drew in the sand. And the man who drew that line is the subject of our deep dive today. We're talking about Kenzaburō Ōe.
A true giant, a literary titan. And he just passed away recently in March of 2023. And his death really felt, like the closing of a major chapter in world literature.
But here's the thing that gets me. When you hear Nobel Prize winner, you tend to picture someone a bit detached, right?
Yeah, maybe a little stuffy.
Academic? Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone writing in a dusty library, completely removed from the world, but detached. His life was just absolute chaos. It was messy. It was packed with conflict.
He was a figure of just massive contradiction. And alongside that massive conviction, he somehow managed to offend almost everyone at some point in his career. The right wing, they absolutely hated him.
And the traditionalists.
The traditionalists didn't know what on earth to do with him.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're not just going to, read off his bibliography. We want to figure out how a boy from a tiny village in the woods, a place that sounds like it's straight out of folklore, how did he become the moral conscience of post-war Japan?
It's a journey that really requires us to understand a kind of collision. On one side, you have the village, the myths, the forest, the deep ancient history.
And on the other?
The other side is the modern world. It's existentialism, it's nuclear politics, it's the big, overwhelming city. And he's the spark that happens when those two things just crash right into each other.
I've got a whole stack of sources here. Biographical records, literary analysis, details on his political activism. And the more I look at it, the more I see a story that's fundamentally about betrayal.
Betrayal is absolutely the key.
Betrayal by teachers, betrayal by the government, and how this one man decided to fight back with the only weapon he really had, his pen.
And if you pull on that one thread, that theme of betrayal, the whole tapestry of his life and his work starts to make perfect sense.
Okay, so let's go back to the source then. Let's go to the forest. Because it seems like everything with Shea, one way or another, circles right back to this village.
It really does. So Shea was born in 1935. The village was called Shess. Now today it's part of a larger town, Uchiko, in the Ihami prefecture, but we need to kind of strip away the modern map for a second.
Get back to the 1930s.
Exactly. Back then, this was deep, deep isolation. Shikoku is one of the main islands of Japan, but this village was tucked away in these valleys, surrounded by these dense, dark forests.
It sounds almost like a setting for a fairy tale, or maybe a horror movie.
It could be both, honestly. And in many ways, it was like a fairy tale. But that isolation is so important psychologically. When you are that deep in the woods, the center, and by that I mean Tokyo, the government, the emperor, it all feels very, very far away.
And his education there, it wasn't exactly standard, was it? I was reading about this idea of his two teachers.
Yes, this is a crucial framework for understanding his entire childhood. He was raised by two completely competing influences, two teachers. The first teacher was his grandmother.
The storyteller.
The storyteller, yeah. But she wasn't just telling him, bedtime stories to help him fall asleep. She was the keeper of the oral history of the entire region. She raised him on the myths and legends of the forest. But here's the really important part. She told him about the local uprisings.
Uprisings, you mean like rebellions against the government?
Exactly. Peasant uprisings. Stories of farmers fighting against the samurai clans or later on fighting against the Meiji government. So she instilled in him this idea from a very young age that the village was a place of resistance.
So it wasn't just a place, it was an idea.
It was an idea. The village had its own soul, its own rules, and it often stood in direct opposition to the power of the center. She represented the forest.
Okay, so that's teacher number 1, the grandmother, representing the forest and rebellion. So who is teacher number 2?
Teacher number 2 was the school system. And we have to remember the timeline here. He starts school in 1941. This is the absolute peak of Japanese militarism. World War II is just ramping up into a frenzy.
So school wasn't just school, it was an indoctrination camp.
It was essentially that. The curriculum wasn't just, reading and math. It was loyalty. In class, she was forced to pronounce his absolute unquestioning loyalty to Emperor Hirohito.
And they didn't just say the emperor is our leader, right? It was more than that.
Oh, much more. They taught the children that the emperor was a god, an Arahitogami, a living deity walking the earth.
I'm trying to imagine being, 6 or 7 years old. You trust adults implicitly at that age. And every single adult in the school is telling you that the man in Tokyo is literally divine. That has to wire your brain in a very specific way.
It absolutely does. It creates a reality where your entire purpose in life is to serve that deity. The teachers would ask the kids, what would you do if the emperor commanded it?
And the answer was?
The answer they were taught was, I would die. I would cut open my belly.
That is unbelievably heavy stuff for a first grader.
It's terrifying. But here's the thing. She bought into it completely. He was a patriotic boy. He believed the teachers. He believed the emperor was God. But then, as the timeline moves forward into 1944 and 1945, reality starts to crack.
And the first crack is personal. His father dies.
Yes, in 1944. And there's just one detail about his father that I think is just really telling. He had a bark stripping business.
Bark stripping? What for?
For paper currency. As the war dragged on, the Japanese economy was completely collapsing. Metal was scarce, so they were actually using tree bark to make money. It just grounds the family in this gritty, desperate material reality of the war. So the father, patriarch of the family, dies. And then, a year later, in 1945, the ultimate patriarch falls.
Japan surrenders.
The defeat. And the emperor goes on the radio, the famous Jewel voice broadcast.
And suddenly the God has a voice.
And he sounds like a human being. He sounds weak and kind of reedy. He's renouncing his divinity. But for young Kenzaburō, the real shock wasn't just that they lost the war. The shock was watching the adults.
The teachers.
The teachers. The exact same men who had, beaten him for not bowing low enough to the emperor's portrait. Overnight, and I mean literally overnight, they just pivoted.
What did they do?
The Americans arrived, the occupation began, and suddenly these same teachers were standing in front of the class saying, democracy is great, we love democracy, the Americans are our friends.
Wait, so no apology, no moment of, hey kids, sorry we were wrong about that whole dying for a living God thing?
Nothing. Not a word. Just a seamless, totally shameless switch. They just pretended the previous years hadn't happened. And for She, who was 10 years old, this was a massive foundational trauma.
It's the realization that the people in charge aren't just wrong, they're liars. They're hollow.
Precisely. He felt so deeply betrayed. He realized that authority figures would say whatever they needed to say to survive. They had no core beliefs. And that raw sense of betrayal became the engine for his entire literary career. He decided right then and there that he would never, ever trust the state or the authority again.
So you've got this disillusioned 10-year-old kid in the woods. His dad is dead. The teachers are hypocrites. The emperor isn't a god. He needs a new compass, a new North Star. Where does he find it?
He finds it in his mother, Koseki. She really stepped in after his father died, and she did something very specific and very important. She bought him books.
And not the propaganda books they were getting at school.
No, not at all. She bought him The Wonderful Adventures of Nils, and even more importantly, she bought him a copy of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Mark Twain. In a tiny village in Shikoku in the 1940s.
It sounds so unlikely, doesn't it? But just think about Huckleberry Finn for a second. Why would that specific book resonate so deeply with him at that specific moment?
Well, Huck is a kid, right? And he's totally on the fringes of society.
Huck is an outcast. He completely rejects the civilizing influence of the widow Douglas. He rejects the hypocrisy of a society that supports slavery while claiming to be Christian. What does Huck do? He goes to the river. He goes to the wild to find his own morality.
All right, then I'll go to hell. That's the famous line when he decides to help Jim.
Exactly. Huck chooses what society calls hell over the fake morality of the adults. And she read that, and he saw himself. He saw the village in the woods as his Mississippi River. Huckleberry Finn became his Bible. It was a story about how to survive in a world of lying adults.
So he's got his literary armor on now. He's armed with Mark Twain. But he doesn't stay in the village forever. He's obviously smart.
He's brilliant. He excels at the local high school in Matsuyama. And then at 18, he makes the big move. He leaves the forest, and he goes to the ultimate symbol of the center. He goes to Tokyo.
And he gets into the University of Tokyo. I mean, we need to put this in context.
Mm-hmm.
That is the Harvard, the Oxford, the Yale of Japan, all rolled into one. It is the elite factory.
It's where the bureaucrats who run the country are made. But Shi doesn't go there to become a bureaucrat. He enrolls to study French literature.
Why French? Why not, classic Japanese literature?
You really have to understand the mood of the Japanese intellectuals in the 1950s. There was this feeling that traditional Japanese culture in some way had led them into the abyss of the war. So they were looking outward. They were hungry for new frameworks, new ways to think about the human condition.
So they looked to Europe for answers.
Specifically, they looked to Jean-Paul Sartre, to existentialism.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. Existentialism is one of those big words. What did it actually mean for a kid like Shi coming to where he came from?
At its core, what Sartre was arguing was that existence precedes essence. What that means is you aren't born with a preordained destiny. You aren't born a servant of the emperor. You're born as a blank slate, and you are radically responsible for your own actions. You create your own meaning through the choices you make.
That must have felt incredibly liberating for a generation that had been told their only destiny was to die for the state.
It was like a blast of fresh air. It was oxygen. It was freedom. But she didn't just stop with Sartre. He studied under this amazing professor named Kazuo Watanabe, who was an expert on François Rabelais.
Rabelais, the 16th century French writer?
The very same. The author of Gargantua and Pantagruel. We're talking giants, fart jokes, gluttony, grotesque bodies. It's wild stuff.
This seems like such a weird mix. Sartre is all serious and depressed, and Rabelais is, he's just gross and funny.
But for Shi, they fit together perfectly. Rabelais offered him something called grotesque realism. The idea that the body, the sweating, bleeding, defecating physical body, is the ultimate reality, and that reality degrades power. Well, you can't be an aloof divine emperor if you're being described in Rabelaisian terms. It brings the high and mighty crashing down to earth. It's a great equalizer.
So he's got this incredible toolkit now. He's got the folklore from his grandmother, the sense of betrayal from the war, the radical freedom of existentialism from Sartre, and the grotesque physical body from Rabelais. And he starts writing.
And he just explodes onto the scene. He starts publishing in 1957 while he's still a student at Today.
Talk about an overachiever.
He writes a story called Lavish Are the Dead, which is set in occupied Tokyo. And then in 1958, he writes The Catch, which is sometimes translated as prize stock. And this one wins the Akutagawa Prize. That is the biggest, most prestigious prize for a new writer in Japan.
So let's dive into The Catch, because the plot sounds... well, it sounds pretty intense.
It is incredibly intense, and it takes us right back to the village. The story is set in a remote village during the war. A Black American GI's plane is shot down, and he's captured by the villagers.
So the enemy literally just falls out of the sky into their world.
Exactly. But the villagers don't turn him over to the authorities right away. They keep him locked up in a cellar. And the whole story is told through the eyes of the village children.
Okay, so how do the kids react to this enemy? Are they scared of him?
That's the fascinating part. At first, he's this terrifying monster to them, but then, over time, he becomes something else entirely. They start to see him almost as a pet or a strange, powerful beast. They feed him. They watch him. They start to form this weird, unspoken bond with him. He uses this concept he calls the child god.
The child god? What's that?
It's an archetype he uses, a figure that is somehow innocent and powerful, but also abandoned and trapped. The GI is outside of their society, just like the kids are. So there's this sense of shared isolation between them.
But knowing Che, I have a feeling this doesn't end with them all becoming best friends.
No. It ends in betrayal. The adults intervene. The army comes to collect the catch. And in the chaos of it all, the adults kill the GI. The children witness the murder of this being they had bonded with.
So it destroys their innocence.
Completely. It's the 1945 trauma replayed in fiction. The adults, once again, ruin everything.
And he was also wrestling with the American occupation itself in these early works, right? I read about this theory of occupation he developed. He used a triad X, Y, Z. It sounds like algebra, but it's actually his political theory.
It is. It's a very cynical, very sharp bit of analysis. He looked at the power dynamics he saw playing out in Tokyo, and he broke it down into 3 parts. Z is the foreigner, the big power, the American GI. Z holds all the cards.
Okay, so Z is the conqueror.
Right. X is the Japanese person, but X is placed in this humiliating, inactive position. X fails to take initiative. X is passive.
So X represents Japan's helplessness, or maybe it's passivity.
Yes. And then you have Y. Y is the third party. Y is the one who is sandwiched between them. Y is often an interpreter, or very frequently in his stories, a prostitute. Someone who facilitates the interaction between the conqueror and the conquered.
And he used sexual metaphors to describe this power dynamic.
Oh, explicitly. He really wanted to shock the Japanese public out of its complacency. He was criticizing their passivity. He was basically shouting, "You are behaving like X. You are just accepting your humiliation."
He was definitely earning that angry young man label at this point.
He really was. He was just relentlessly poking the bruise of the national ego.
But the real explosion, the one that actually put his life in physical danger, that came in 1961. With these 2 novellas, 17 and The Death of a Political Youth.
This is an absolutely pivotal moment. To understand the incredible risk he took, we have to look at what was happening in the real world in 1960.
You're talking about the assassination of Asanuma.
Yes. Inejiro Asanuma was the chairman of the Japan Socialist Party. In October of 1960, he was giving a speech in a crowded hall, and a 17-year-old boy named Yamaguchi Otoya rushed the stage with a short sword, a yoridushi, and plunged it right into Asanuma's torso.
And it was broadcast on live television.
On live television, the footage is still absolutely shocking to watch today. The assassin was just a kid, a right-wing extremist kid. He was arrested, and then 3 weeks later, he committed suicide in his prison cell.
And for the right wing in Japan, this kid, Yamaguchi, became a martyr, a hero.
Exactly. They worshipped him. And then, just a few months later, Kenzabuchi decides he's going to write about it.
He fictionalizes the assassin.
He writes 17, where he tries to get inside the head of a boy who would do something like this. But here's the key. He doesn't paint him as some glorious samurai hero. He paints him as a lonely, sexually frustrated, deeply confused teenager who clings to the emperor cult because he has no self-esteem.
Wow. So he took their god and he made him into a pathetic, lonely teenager.
He completely stripped away the myth, and the reaction was nuclear.
Yeah.
The extreme right wing went absolutely berserk. They felt he was blaspheming their sacred martyr.
What kind of backlash are we talking about here? Bad reviews.
We're talking death threats. Constant, day and night, for weeks. The publisher, the magazine Bunga Kukai, was besieged, and the publisher eventually caved. They issued a public apology to their offended readers.
Oh, what about Sure?
Refused to apologize. He said, "I wrote the truth," but he absolutely paid a price for it. He was physically assaulted by a right-winger during a speech he was giving at the University of Tokyo.
They actually attacked him, physically.
They jumped him. So he wasn't just fighting with words anymore. He was in real physical danger. And it connects right back to his childhood, doesn't it? He saw the violent, dangerous edge of that unwavering loyalty to the emperor, and he refused to bow down to it.
So here he is. He's the bad boy of Japanese letters. He's writing about sex, violence, political assassination. He's getting death threats. It's this literary provocateur. But then something happens in 1963, and the whole story just pivots completely.
The pivot. This is the moment where the political becomes intensely personal.
His son, Hikari, is born.
Yes. In 1963, his eldest son, Hikari, was born with a brain hernia.
A brain hernia.
It was a catastrophic birth defect. The doctors told her that the child would have permanent, severe learning disabilities. They said surgery was required just to save his life, but that his quality of life would be, well, very different.
And he really struggled with this. I think it's important to say that he didn't just instantly become this saintly father figure.
No, not at all. And that's what makes him such a powerful and honest writer. He was brutally honest about his own darkness. He admitted that he wrestled with the desire to just escape. He wanted to run away. He even wrestled with the idea of letting the child die.
He stared right into the abyss.
He absolutely did. And instead of hiding that shame, he wrote about it. He wrote the novel A Personal Matter in 1964.
Which is probably his most famous book, at least internationally.
I would say so, yeah. The protagonist is this guy nicknamed Bird. Bird's wife gives birth to a brain-damaged baby, and Bird spends the entire novel just trying to run away. He drinks, he has an affair, he even plots to have the baby killed by a shady doctor.
It is a rough read. It's so unflinching.
It's existentialism in practice. It's Sartre's philosophy put to the ultimate, most painful test. There's no God to tell Bird what to do. There's no instruction manual. He has to choose. Does he escape his responsibility, or does he accept this new reality?
And in the book, and this is a spoiler, but it's crucial, Bird eventually stops running. At the end, he decides to keep the baby and raise him.
And that choice mirrors Shi's life. He chose to accept Hikari. And that single decision changed his writing forever.
How so? What was the shift?
Well, the political assassins, they just disappeared from his work. The occupation theory stuff faded into the background. He started writing over and over again about the idiot boy archetype.
Now that phrase, idiot boy, sounds pretty harsh to modern ears.
It does, but we have to understand he was using it in a very specific literary sense. He was referencing Dostoevsky's novel The Idiot, or the Holy Fool tradition in literature.
Okay, so what's the idea behind the Holy Fool?
The idea is that this child, this person who is outside of normal society, possesses a kind of spiritual purity, a connection to the forest of the soul that all the civilized modern intellectuals lack.
So the themes of his work shifted from revolution to coexistence.
Exactly. How do we live with the other? How do we heal? Hikari became his muse. He said that he was writing in a way to give his son a voice.
And the most incredible twist of this whole story is that Hikari didn't stay silent.
No. This is just the most beautiful part of the whole story. Hikari grew up with very severe limitations in language, but he had this incredible, uncanny ear for music. He could identify bird calls instantly, he responded deeply to Mozart, and eventually he began to compose his own music.
He became a composer, a professional one.
A successful classical composer, yes. There's this wonderful image you can picture of the Ōe household. The father in one corner of the room, writing these dense, difficult, complex novels about his son. And the son in the other corner of the same room, writing pure, beautiful, melodic music.
That is just amazing. The father tries to give the son a literary voice, and the son finds his own very real musical voice.
It's one of the great redemption arcs in literary history. Much later in his life, wrote a memoir called A Healing Family, which really showed the warmth and the humor of their life together. It was a million miles away from the darkness and despair of a personal matter.
So we've moved from the angry young man to the dedicated father. And the world, it really took notice of this transformation. Let's fast forward to 1994, the Nobel Prize.
The absolute pinnacle. The Swedish Academy awarded him the Nobel Prize in Literature, and their citation was fascinating. They said he created an imagined world where life and myth condense to form a disconcerting picture of the human predicament today.
Life and myth condense. That's it right there. That's the village and the city, that's the grandmother's stories, and the existentialist philosophy.
It's all of it combined into one. And when he won, he gave an interview to the New York Times and said that his writing was focused on one thing: the dignity of human beings.
Which is so poignant, isn't it? Considering his early work was all about humiliation. He moved from analyzing humiliation to celebrating dignity.
A perfect way to put it.
So he wins the Nobel.
Yeah.
Japan is thrilled. This is only the second Japanese author to win after Kawabata. The government is popping the champagne corks. And then comes the scandal we talked about right at the start, the Order of Culture.
The government steps in. They want to give him the Order of Culture. It's customary. It's what's done for Nobel winners.
But he refuses.
He refuses, flat out. And this brings us right back to that core conviction. He hadn't forgotten 1945. He hadn't forgotten the betrayal of the teachers in that classroom.
So for him, accepting a medal from the emperor would have been, well, hypocrisy.
It would have been a betrayal of his own core values. He saw a very clear distinction between democracy and the imperial system. And so he made that famous statement, "I do not recognize any authority, any value higher than democracy."
That is such a bold, unambiguous statement. He's basically saying the emperor is not above the democratic will of the people.
And in Japan, even in the 90s, that is a loaded, controversial statement.
Yeah.
The right wing was furious all over again.
He's nearly 60 years old at this point. He's a Nobel Laureate, the most famous writer in the country. And he's still getting threats.
He is still a lightning rod, but it just goes to show that his conviction wasn't some phase of his youth. It wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was his philosophical core. He would not accept a badge of honor from a system he felt had lied to his entire generation.
But he wasn't done fighting. In fact, you could argue his biggest legal battle was still ahead of him. Let's talk about the Okinawa lawsuit. This is where he goes from being writer to defendant.
This is a fascinating and terrifying story. It's a battle over memory itself. And it stems from a book he wrote way, way back in 1970 called Okinawa Notes.
What was that book about?
It was a collection of essays about the situation in Okinawa. And in it, he addressed a very dark chapter of the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. He stated, based on testimony, that the Japanese military had coerced Okinawan civilians into committing mass suicide.
This is the horrific history where entire families were given grenades by soldiers and told to kill themselves rather than surrender to the Americans.
Yes. And for decades, this was the widely accepted historical fact. But by the year 2005, there was a rising tide of historical revisionism in Japan. There was this movement to clean up the history of the war, to make the military look noble and heroic again.
So they came for show.
2 retired military officers sued Kenzaburō for libel.
They sued him in 2005 for a book he had written in 1970, 35 years later.
Yes, it was a strategic lawsuit. They claimed his writing defamed them and the entire military. Their argument was that the mass suicides were voluntary, that the Okinawan civilians chose to die out of pure loyalty.
That just sounds like a terrifying attempt to rewrite history.
It was. The stakes were huge. If they could get a legal judgment against a Nobel Prize winner, they could use that to force changes in school textbooks. They could literally scrub the history books clean.
So this wasn't just about his bank account. This was about the truth of what happened in 1945.
Exactly. And it took a huge toll on him. He barely wrote any fiction between 2006 and 2008. He was completely consumed by this trial. He would sit in the courtroom in Osaka just listening to the arguments day after day.
But he won in the end.
He did. In 2008, the Osaka District Court dismissed all the charges, and the judge, a man named Toshimasa Fukami, his ruling was crystal clear. He ruled that, quote, the military was deeply involved in the mass suicides. It was a total and complete vindication for Ray.
That must have been a monumental relief.
Frye's response was classic Ray. He didn't gloat, he didn't celebrate, he simply said, the judge accurately read my writing.
The judge accurately read my writing. I love that. It's so powerful in his understatement.
And after the trial, he felt free to write fiction again. He published a novel called Death by Water in 2009.
And this book features a character who's based on his own father.
Yeah. Yes. We mentioned his father died in the war in 1944. In the novel, the protagonist's father is a staunch supporter of the imperial system who ends up drowning in a flood. So even in his late 70s, Shea is still processing that primary trauma. He's still wrestling with the ghost of his father and the ghost of the emperor.
And then, just 2 years later, in 2011, another disaster strikes Japan, the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
And this woke the activist in him one last time. You have to remember, Shea had been writing about Hiroshima and the victims of the atomic bomb, the hibakusha, since the 1960s. He saw it as a profound moral duty.
So for him, nuclear power plants and nuclear bombs are deeply connected.
He sees them as 2 sides of the same existential threat. To him, nuclear energy is an affront to the forest, an affront to life itself. After the Fukushima disaster, he became a very vocal anti-nuclear activist.
And he wasn't just, writing letters to the editor from his study. He was out on the streets.
In 2013, he helped organize a mass demonstration in Tokyo. Thousands and thousands of people showed up. And there's Sir, this elderly, somewhat frail intellectual leading the charge.
There's a really interesting story about him and Noam Chomsky, the American linguist, isn't there?
Yes, they corresponded. Chomsky sent Chomsky a copy of his Okinawa Notes, and Chomsky replied with this story from his own childhood. He said that when he first heard about the bombing of Hiroshima in August of 1945, he couldn't bear the celebration he saw all around him in America.
Everyone was cheering because the war was over.
Right. But Chomsky, who was just a teenager, went out into the woods near his summer camp. And he just sat there alone until the evening. He couldn't participate in the collective joy because all he could think about was the human suffering.
That image, a kid sitting alone in the woods refusing to celebrate, it sounds just like something out of a No novel.
It resonated so deeply with him. She said later, I've always respected Chomsky, but I respected him even more after he told me that. It's that shared sense of moral isolation, of being the one person who has to step out of the parade to ask, wait a minute, is this right?
His final novel was published in 2013, and it was titled In Late Style.
Bunin Yoshikishu. It's a direct reference to Edward Said's concept of late style in art. And it features his longtime literary alter ego, a character named Kudito Choko. In the book, the character finds he's lost interest in writing fiction after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. He decides he has to write directly about what he calls the age of catastrophe.
It seems so fitting. He started his career writing about the catastrophe of the war, and he ended it writing about the catastrophe of the tsunami and nuclear disaster.
He was a witness. From beginning to end, he was a witness.
Kenzaburō Ōe passed away on March 3, 2023. He was 88 years old. When you look back at this incredible life, the village boy, the angry student, the father of a disabled son, the Nobel winner who said no to the emperor, the elderly activist, what is the legacy? What does it all add up to?
He described himself once in an interview he did with the Paris Review. He said, "In principle, I am an anarchist." Kurt Vonnegut once said he was an agnostic who respects Jesus Christ. I am an anarchist who loves democracy.
An anarchist who loves democracy. That's a fantastic contradiction.
I think it sums him up perfectly. He believed in the people. He believed in the messy, difficult, frustrating work of democracy. But he never, ever trusted the state. He never trusted the system.
And you could say he moved Japanese literature from a focus on a certain kind of aesthetic, detached beauty to something grotesque and real and deeply messily human.
He showed that you could take the most personal, private pain imaginable, the birth of a child with brain damage, and turn it into universal art. He showed that you could take the political anger of a betrayed generation and turn it into a lifelong fight for truth.
It's a lesson in using your stuff, isn't it? Your own personal baggage and trauma.
Absolutely. He didn't hide his trauma. He didn't hide his son. He didn't hide his political views. He put it all right there on the page for everyone to see.
And that's why this matters to us, to you listening, even if you're not a Japanese writer from the 20th century. It's about the refusal to conform. Even when your whole country, your whole culture expects you to just play nice and accept the prize.
He could have accepted that order of culture. He could have been the grand old man of letters, safe and respected and beloved. But he chose to be difficult. Because for him, being difficult was the only way to be honest.
So here's a thought to leave you with. Created this entire sprawling literary universe. Dozens of books, characters, myths, and a huge part of it was to give his son, Hikari, a voice. He amplified the voice of the voiceless. So in a world that is just full of information overload, full of noise, whose voice are you trying to amplify? And maybe more importantly, are you brave enough to refuse a badge of honor if it conflicts with your most deeply held core values?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? The courage to say no.
Rest in peace, Kenzaburō Ōe. What a life. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.